I once told the leadership team no to 42 out of 45 hiring requests, right after they had doubled revenue and wanted to grow headcount by 50%. The company went into uproar. VPs marched to the CEO, insisting that I was blocking the company's growth. But here's what they didn't see. If we had made those hires, our payroll would have exploded, our burn would have spiked, and when the market turned and revenue dropped by 25%, we would have been forced into painful layoffs within 90 days. Instead, because we only approved 3 truly strategic roles, we didn't lay off a single person. That decision protected our runway, protected our people, and ultimately our ability to survive the downturn. So in this episode, I'm going to show you why most we need to hire conversations are really process problems in disguise, not capacity problems. And really going to show you how to tell the difference before you make hires you'll regret. If your startup is growing and every leader is shouting for more headcount, this episode might be the thing that saves your company. Let's get to it. So I want to kick things off with a few announcements before we dive into this week's topic. First off, the Startup HR operating system has opened for early access as of last Friday. If you don't know what that is, the Startup HR operating system is my flagship course. It is pretty much my entire playbook that I've used to help companies scale their people functions. And I'm giving free access to the first 3 out of the 13 modules, which is 6 hours of content, including templates, case studies, and so on, to fans of the show and subscribers of the newsletter. The goal from early access is to really get your feedback and see what works, what doesn't, make adjustments before I release the course to the general public. Early access users who give a testimonial that I can publish will get lifetime access to the course for free when it launches, including all future updates. And if you just decide to give feedback with no public testimonial, you still get 50% off the course when it launches later this year. There are 50 spots available and 30 of them have already filled up. If you're interested in signing up for early access, there's a link in the description for the show, in the show notes. Click on that, fill out the form, and I'll reach out to you shortly with access to the course. I hope you join in to get your feedback and help make this the best course for startup HR out there. The second announcement is that if you've been following me on LinkedIn, you've probably seen this one, but organized chaos exploded in 2025. In Spotify's Wrapped for the year, I was really shocked by the numbers, and I want to take a moment out of this episode to say a big thank you to all you listeners out there, because the show outpaced 93% of all other shows on Spotify in terms of growth, which is really mind-blowing, given that I started the show a year and a half ago. Now, the stat that really humbled me is that fans of Organized Chaos listened to the show longer than 74% of other shows on Spotify. We're in the top quartile of most listened to shows, which is really mind-blowing. I'm lost for words here, and all I can say is thank you to each and every one of you guys who has helped this show grow to where it is today, and hopefully we continue growing. The final announcement is one which relates to some little changes to the format of the podcast. Some of you who are subscribed to the newsletter as well received a survey a couple of weeks back, just asking general questions about the format, the types of episodes, and which ones you've enjoyed most, and sort of what resonates with you in terms of a future direction for the show. Turns out that most of you enjoyed the solo podcasts more than the guest interviews. And again, the solo podcast, which involved really me speaking about a specific topic, just like we're going to be doing on this show, and really deep diving into it a bit more. So I've made the decision to really convert the show into a solo podcast exclusively. So starting with this episode and moving forward, you won't be seeing any further interviews unless there's this amazing guests that I just have to bring onto the show because I believe they will be able to give you a lot of value. But otherwise, it's really going to be me picking a topic based on your feedback and really deep diving into that topic. The goal behind every episode is going to be just to drill down into a single focused area of HR for startups, talk about the problem, give some examples, present data, and give you sort of action items on how to tackle those. Another final tweak to the show I'm making is the YouTube channel. I'm going to sort of pause a bit, sort of the video production of the show itself, and just going to stick to really the audio format. Reason being is that I've been doing the video podcast for, I would say, almost a year now. Less than 1% of the show's listeners come from YouTube. And even when I added the video as opposed to the animated audiogram, it improved a little bit, but not to the point where I thought, like, you know what, this is worth the effort, the time and money that I'm putting into the video production. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to focus exclusively on the audio format. And again, the show's still going to be available on all of the podcast apps that are out there. But really, I'm going to focus a bit more on the audio format. And by alleviating the workload from the video part, is going to allow me to really spend more time on just developing the content for the show, as well as some of the other stuff that I have planned for the year. But now let's dive into the topic of this week. So today I'm going to be walking you through a workforce planning approach that could save your startup from a catastrophic mistake. Now, workforce planning and hiring are really high stakes affairs of growing startups. And if they're not done right, they can deplete a startup's cash and really just run it into the ground. So here's a story from when I led HR at a US based e commerce company. Our revenues grew from $45 million to $88 million in 12 months. So the leadership team's immediate reaction was one that I've seen so many times before. They wanted to increase headcount by 50% to support the forecasted revenue growth, which the company had pegged at $105 million. Now, in response to that discussion, I gave the leadership team a workforce planning spreadsheet that mainly focused on one simple idea. Which roles do you want to fill, and how do they help move the business forward? Now, more than 45 requests came back. After my analysis, I only recommended that we approve 3 of them. Now, you can imagine how the leadership team reacted. The company, I kid you not, went into an uproar. The leaders in the organization, my colleagues on the leadership team, they went straight to the CEO trying to bypass me just to plead their case. Now, fortunately for me, the CEO was convinced with my analysis and held steady after I had a chat with him and really walked him through my analysis. But here's what happened next. The market turned and revenues dropped by 25%. Now, had we made all those hires, we would have had to conduct massive layoffs. They just would have been inevitable. But instead, we didn't lay off a single person during that downturn. That's what purposeful workforce planning does. It protects your runway and your team. Now, most startups, they follow a dangerous pattern. When revenue goes up, headcount follows. It feels logical in the moment because you're growing, so you need more people, right? But this thinking destroys companies when the market shifts. So let me break down what actually happened at that e-commerce company. When those 45 hiring requests came in, I didn't just look at the budget. I tracked 3 critical metrics that every founder and startup HR professional needs to understand. The first one is the fully loaded cost per employee per department. This is the salary plus benefits plus taxes, equipment, everything else, down to the software licenses that every individual is going to need for their job. When you model real hiring impact on your runway, you cannot afford to underestimate burn. And most growing startups really do that. The second metric I like to track is revenue per employee. And I track it as a trend over time, not a snapshot, because this metric will tell you if hiring is making your company more efficient or less. If revenue per employee is declining while you're adding headcount, you're not really scaling effectively. You're actually introducing bloat. And the third metric I like to look at is payroll as a percentage of revenue. Now, this is a classic startup health metric. It really shows whether hiring is outpacing revenue growth. When the percentage climbs too high, you are just really one bad quarter away from trouble. So I had been running those numbers for a while and then baked in those 45 requests just to see the projected impact. I used a very simple workforce planning template really just to map out each role against our strategic goals. I looked at the business justification that these leaders provided. And here's what I found. 42 out of those 45 requests were just masking operational problems. The customer support team wanted 3 customer support reps because ticket response times were climbing. But when I dug into their operation, it turned out they were manually entering data that could be automated and didn't have an organized knowledge base that they could really rely on to answer common customer questions and requests. They didn't need people, they just needed a better system. The marketing team, on the other hand, they wanted two project managers because most of their projects were running late. Now, the real problem was that there was no standardized project intake process. Teams were starting work without clear requirements. More managers won't fix that, but better processes would. The engineering team wanted for engineers to handle technical debt and code refactoring, but they didn't prioritize which technical debt actually mattered, what was essential versus what was good to tackle. They were trying to throw bodies really to tackle everything at once, with no clear prioritization based on impact of the business. And this pattern repeated itself across almost every request that came in. Leaders saw capacity problems and immediately jumped to hiring. They didn't stop to ask if the capacity crunch was a symptom of something much deeper. Now let's talk about the math here. Those 42 unnecessary hires would have added roughly $3.2 million in fully loaded annual costs to that company. Now, when revenue dropped 25%, that's $22 million in lost revenue. So payroll would have jumped from 32% of revenue to nearly 45%. If you compare this to the projected number of 105 million, then that would have been a 37% drop. The company would have been forced into layoffs within 90 days. But instead, because we only made strategic hires with very clear purpose, we weathered that downturn without cutting anyone. And the company even remained profitable. Now, this isn't an outlier by any stretch. I've seen so many different variations of the same problem over my career. And it happens frequently because problems don't stand out when revenue is climbing and cash is flowing. But one bump in the road brings you crashing back down to earth. Many companies never recover from that kind of crash. That's why the most counterintuitive advice I give is this. As your revenue grows, you need to be more critical of hiring, not less. Because growth masks inefficiency. It hides broken processes and it makes bad hires look acceptable because you can afford them when things are going well. But in reality, you can't afford them because startup revenue is volatile, especially in the early days. And the hires you make today will determine whether you survive tomorrow's downturn. So, with that, let's talk about the framework that separates smart hiring from panic hiring. There are two types of hires that you can make. There are capacity hires and there are capability hires. And understanding this distinction will completely transform how you approach hiring moving forward. Capacity hiring means doing more of what you already do. You have the skills in-house, you just need more hands on deck. Capability hiring, on the other hand, means acquiring skills your team doesn't currently possess. You're simply trying to do something new or different. So I've worked with more than 150 startups over my career, and most startup capacity problems that I hear about aren't actually capacity problems. They're usually process problems in disguise. And it's a consistent pattern that I see very often. A marketing team says they need 2 more content writers because they can't hit their publishing targets. At face value, this sounds like a capacity issue, right? But when you dig deeper, you find they're rewriting every piece 3 times because there's no content brief template. They're starting from scratch on every article because there's no style guide. They're debating strategy in every meeting because there's no documented content plan. That's not a people problem. That is a 100% process problem. Fix the process, and suddenly the existing team can exponentially increase their output. Or take a sales team requesting 3 more account executives because the pipeline is growing. It sounds like a reasonable ask until you discover they're spending 40% of their time on manual data entry in the CRM. They're building custom proposals for every deal instead of using templates. They're qualifying leads by gut feel instead of using a scoring system and spending way too much time on low probability leads. Again, this is not a capacity problem. It's an efficiency problem. Before you hire for capacity, always ask yourself, have we optimized the operation? Have we documented the process? Have we eliminated unnecessary steps? Have we automated what can be automated? Have we standardized what should be standardized? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then you don't have a capacity problem yet. You have an optimization opportunity. In this case, I generally advise that you pause hiring until you've cleaned up your operation. Otherwise, you're just going to be adding fuel to the fire. Now, capability hiring is very different. This is when you genuinely need skills that just don't exist in your company today. Maybe you're launching a new product line and you need someone who has built that type of product before. Maybe you're entering a new market and just need regional expertise. Maybe you're implementing a new system and need technical knowledge your team lacks. Capability gaps are tied to strategic goals. They're about doing something you've never done before. And here's the key question: is this capability core to our business or not? If the capability is core to delivering value to customers, then build it internally with full-time hires. You need that knowledge to stay in-house because it is a differentiator. You need to develop that expertise over time. You need to build institutional knowledge around it. But if the capability is not core, then rent it. Use consultants or contractors with fixed-term agreements. Get the expertise you need for the project or whatever initiative it is you're building, then just move on. I once worked with a company that needed to migrate their entire tech stack to a new platform. It's an operationally critical project, but not a core capability they needed long term. They hired a migration specialist on a 6-month contract. The project finished on time, the specialist moved on, and no permanent headcount was added. Contrast that with another company that tried to handle customer success with rotating contractors to save money on hiring FTEs. Customer success was absolutely core to their retention model, but the lack of continuity killed the relationships. They were constantly retraining people who would leave just as they got effective. A company like this should have built that capability internally from day one because their customer churn shot up by 15% when they made this change. So let me distill all of this into a usable framework. Temporary capacity needs should get temporary solutions. Address permanent capacity needs with process optimization first, then hire FTEs only if optimization isn't enough. When it comes to capability gaps, evaluate whether they're core or not. Core capabilities should be built with permanent hires, while non-core capabilities should be rented for a fixed duration. You should be more critical of capacity hires as you grow, not less, because the bigger you get, the more expensive it is to carry unnecessary headcount. The more complex your operation becomes, the harder it is to course correct. So how do you actually implement all this? Let me walk you through the logic I used to save that e-commerce company from disaster. And I'll walk you through the questioning that I used with that leadership team. Question 1. What role are you trying to fill? This sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how vague most hiring requests are. And you've probably seen it if you work in HR. I've seen requests for things like someone to help with marketing or another engineer. That's not a role, that's just a wish. You need specificity. What will this person do on day 1? What outcomes are they responsible for? What decisions will they make? If a hiring manager cannot answer those questions clearly, then they're not ready to hire. Question 2. How does this role support our strategic goals? And I mean actual strategic goals, not things like we want to grow or we want to be better. Strategic goals are specific. Things like we're entering a new market. We want to launch a new product line. We want to reduce churn by 10%. We want to achieve profitability by Q3 of this year. Every hire should connect directly to one of these goals. If it doesn't, it's probably a nice to have and not a must have. And nice to haves can wait. Question 3, and this is probably my favorite. What is the business justification? This is where you run the numbers. What is the fully loaded cost of this hire? How does it impact your runway? What is the expected return from this hire? When will you see that return? For capacity hires, the justification should include proof that you've optimized the operation first. Show me the process improvements you've made. Show me the efficiency gains. Show me why optimization alone won't solve the problem. For capability hires, the justification should explain why this capability matters now and whether it's permanent or temporary. If it's temporary, why are you hiring full-time instead of using contractors? So here's how all this played out at that e-commerce company I was talking about. One of the 3 approved hires was a data analyst. The strategic goal was to improve retention by understanding user behavior patterns. And the business justification was that we had the data, but nobody with the skills to analyze it. This was a capability gap, and it was core to the business and it was permanent. So we approved it. And this predated the whole AI era. Because I think in this day and age, you can make an argument that AI can probably do that job for you. Another approved hire was a compliance specialist. The strategic goal it was aligned to was to expand into the European markets. And the core business justification was that we needed someone who understood GDPR and EU regulations. That was a capability gap and it was core to the expansion. And since we planned on being in that market permanently, this is a permanent need. So it was approved. The third role I approved was a senior engineer for a new product line. The strategic goal was to launch a mobile app for the company's products. The main justification was that none of our existing engineers had mobile development experience, and more than half the company's traffic came from mobile devices. It was a clear capability gap, it was core to the business, and it was a permanent need. So that's why it got approved. This approach forces clarity. It makes you confront whether you're solving a real problem or just throwing money at a symptom. When you implement this, expect pushback. Department heads will argue that their needs are urgent. They'll say you don't understand their challenges. They'll escalate to the CEO just like they did with me. But this is where CEO trust matters. If you've built credibility by showing your work, by running the numbers, by connecting decisions to strategic outcomes, then leadership will back you. If you haven't built that trust yet, this is the time to start. Show your analysis. Be transparent about trade-offs and demonstrate that you're protecting the company's future. When you present an objective evaluation, it becomes very difficult for others to poke holes in your argument. Track your success using metrics like the ones I mentioned earlier. Watch fully loaded costs per employee by department. Monitor revenue by employee as a trend. Keep payroll as a percentage of revenue in check. When those metrics stay healthy while you're growing, you're doing it right. When they start sliding, you're hiring too fast or hiring wrong. Now let's talk about how you implement this starting today. The first step is really to build a basic workforce planning template, which includes all these questions and justifications that we talked about. Make sure that every hiring request goes through whatever process you put in place for that before it reaches you for approval. And make this non-negotiable. No exceptions for urgent needs or executive requests. Something I'm personally infamous for is telling executives that any hiring request that doesn't go through the workforce planning process doesn't exist to me. In other words, I won't review it, I won't discuss it, and I sure as hell won't approve it. If someone tries to hire them anyway and circumvent this process, it is immediate grounds for termination. That is how I handle this personally. Now, I know this might be a bit cutthroat for some of you, or maybe not doable for others, but the reason I do this is because hiring makes up 60 to 80% of a company's expenditure. So you can literally run the company to the ground if you're not careful with hiring. Managers who keep telling you their request is urgent usually means that they didn't plan ahead. Executives also need to model the behavior you want to see for this implementation to work across the company. If this knee-jerk type of hiring behavior is prevalent at the top, then your company is going to be bleeding cash in no time. The second step is to audit your current team. Look at every role and ask, is this person filling a capability gap or a capacity gap? Is their function tied to a strategic goal? If you can't articulate why someone works at your company and what they're accomplishing, you've got a problem. This doesn't mean you should start firing people. It means you need to get clear on what they should be doing. It means that you need to redefine roles if needed. You might need to shift people to higher value work. Fill the gaps in role clarity before you add more people to the confusion. But yes, there are situations where you uncover that a few roles are unnecessary and you need to eliminate them. The third step is to establish your metrics baseline. Calculate your fully loaded cost per employee by department right now. Track your current revenue per employee. Know your payroll as a percentage of revenue. These become your baseline numbers. And set targets for where these metrics should be in 6 to 12 months. If you're hiring well, revenue per employee should be climbing, or at least holding steady. Payroll percentage should stay within your target range even as you grow, but ideally, it should start to drop over time. Now, the fourth step is the hard part, and that's saying no. When department heads come to you wanting to hire, and you've determined that it is not justified, you have to hold the line. This is where a lot of HR leaders cave because they don't want conflict, especially if it's with someone who has a lot of influence in the company. But here's what I tell them. Every unnecessary hire you approve today is a person you might have to lay off tomorrow. When you get pushback, just redirect the conversation. Ask what they've tried to optimize first. Ask them to show you the process improvements they've made. Ask them to quantify the impact of the hire on strategic goals. Make them do the work to justify it. And believe me when I tell you, most requests will fall apart under that kind of scrutiny. Whenever I do this with hiring managers, many of them actually talk themselves out of the hiring requests once we walk through the logic of the process. The requests that don't fall apart during the evaluation are the ones that are probably legitimate. Now, the fifth step is to revisit your workforce plan quarterly because strategic goals shift, market conditions change. What made sense 3 months ago might not make sense today. So build in regular checkpoints to reassess your workforce plan. And here's the long-term benefit that most founders don't think about. When you hire purposefully, you build a team that can weather uncertainty. You're not bloated. You're not carrying dead weight. Every person has a clear reason for being there. That means when the market turns, and it will turn at some point, you just don't have to make gut-wrenching decisions about who stays and who goes. You've already made the hard decisions up front by only hiring people who are essential to the business. Well, that's it for today's episode. If you want more operational insights like this, follow the podcast so you don't miss any new episodes. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please leave me a review in your favorite podcasting app to help the show reach a wider audience. And I'll see you on the next one.